Tostig Godwinson was an Anglo-Saxon nobleman, Earl of Northumbria, and the brother of King Harold Godwinson. In the Norse Kings sagas, he is remembered as a clever man and a formidable warrior. In addition, in the writing of an anonymous life of King Edward the Confessor, Tostig is described as strong, brave, handsome, graceful, and open-handed. Both descriptions of him in Norse and Anglo-Saxon sources paint him as a great man and warrior. Many historians view Tostig's exile from England as the spark that ignited two of the most pivotal invasions in British history, Harald Hardrada's Norse assault and William the Duke of Normandy's legendary conquest. These events would culminate in the fall of Anglo-Saxon England and unleash a series of brutal, bloody battles. This is his story. Tostig was the third son of Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, a man whose rise to power was nothing short of meteoric during the reign of Canute the Great, the King of England, Denmark, and Norway. Though destined for greatness, the family's legacy was born from shadows. Tostig's grandfather, Wulfnoth Sild, a Thegn of Sussex, had been accused of treachery by King Ethelred the Unready, casting a long stain over the Godwin family name. Godwin, Tostig's father, thus rose from a position of disgrace, his early life marked by the burden of suspicion and political exile. Yet, Godwin's fortunes changed dramatically. He served King Edmund Ironside loyally during the bitter struggle for the English throne against Canute. When peace was eventually struck between the two monarchs, and Edmund died shortly thereafter, Canute, recognizing Godwin's loyalty and martial prowess, elevated him to the position of the Earl of Wessex. From that moment, Godwin became one of the most influential men in England. He strengthened his political stature further through marriage to Gytha Thorkelsdottir, a Danish noblewoman of illustrious heritage. Gytha was the daughter of Thorgil Sprakleg, a Danish chieftain who, according to some historians, was the son of the legendary Viking warrior Styrbjorn the Strong, the Prince of Sweden. Styrbjorn was said to be the son of King Olaf Bjornsson of Sweden, making Tostig a direct descendant and great-great-grandson of Swedish royalty. On his father's side, Tostig may have also held royal English blood. Some reconstructions of his ancestry suggest that Earl Godwin descended from King Ethelred I of Wessex, the elder brother to Alfred the Great. During the tumultuous time of the Viking invasions and the threat posed by the great heathen army and the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ethelred I's untimely death from battle wounds led to the crown passing to Alfred, as Ethelred's own sons were too young to rule. If both of these lineages, the Danish and the English, are to be believed, then Tostig Godwinson could rightly claim royal blood on both sides of his family, descended from kings of both Saxon and Scandinavian realms. Tostig was born in the year 1029, during the reign of Canute the Great, at a time when England was an Anglo-Scandinavian kingdom, a realm shaped by both Danish and Saxon traditions. As the son of Godwin, the Earl of Wessex, Tostig would have enjoyed one of the finest upbringings available in such a society, nurtured in a world that valued strength, loyalty, and statesmanship. From an early age, he would have been trained in the arts of war and governance, prepared for a life of power and responsibility. In the year 1035, when Tostig was still a young child, King Canute died, and the English crown passed to his son Harold Harefoot. Harold reigned for 5 years before his own death in the year 1040. The throne then passed to his half-brother Harthacnut, who ruled for a brief 2 years before meeting an untimely end, poisoned at a wedding feast in the year 1042. Tostig's formative years unfolded under the shadow of the Viking kings of England, a time of shifting power and fragile peace. When Harthacnut died, he was succeeded by Edward the Confessor, returning the English crown to its Anglo-Saxon roots. By the time Tostig reached the age of 13, he had already witnessed the deaths of 3 English kings and the coronation of a 4th. Tostig's father Godwin carefully secured his family's influence at court by allying with the new king, Edward the Confessor. He arranged the marriage of his daughter Edith to the king, making Edward Tostig's brother-in-law. Meanwhile, Godwin's sons were rising in prominence. Sweyn, the eldest, was granted an earldom covering Somerset, Gloucestershire, and Hertfordshire. Harold received East Anglia, and Godwin himself retained control of Wessex, with only Mercia and Northumbria beyond their reach. The Godwins now held sway over much of England. However, tensions soon emerged. Edward, raised in exile in Normandy during the Viking rule, began introducing Norman customs and courtiers to English governance. As a half-Norman outsider with little experience in English politics, his efforts clashed with the entrenched power of the Godwins, setting the stage for conflict. The crisis came in the year 1051. Godwin raised an army, while the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria rallied to their king. Neither side wished to strike first, and the standoff ended with a meeting of the Witan, where Godwin's faction, outnumbered, were forced into exile. Godwin, his wife, and sons Sweyn, Tostig, and Gurth fled to Flanders. Harold and Leofwine to Ireland, and Queen Edith was sent to a nunnery. On an unknown date before September of the year 1051, Tostig married Judith of Flanders, the daughter of Baldwin IV. The exile of the Godwin clan was short-lived. In the year 1052, Godwin and his sons returned with fleets and mercenaries. Godwin rallied the support of his old vassals in Sussex and Kent, and then sailed on London. The king, unable to resist the formidable army, was forced to restore their titles and lands. Edith the Queen returned to court, and many of Edward's Norman favourites were expelled. So complete was Godwin's restoration to power that Edward never again challenged him. Yet, the triumph was fleeting. In the year 1053, while celebrating Easter in Winchester with the king and his sons, Godwin suddenly collapsed and died. The earldom of Wessex would pass to Tostig's brother Harald, as Sweyn at this time had died while on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Over the next few years, one earldom after another fell vacant, and was granted to Harold Godwinson's various younger brothers. First, Siward, the Earl of Northumbria, died in the year 1055, and was succeeded by Tostig. Then in the year 1057, the Earl of Mercia died, and was succeeded by his son Elfgar, freeing up the earldom of East Anglia. A reduced form of this earldom was bestowed upon Gurth, while the counties of Essex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Middlesex, Surrey, and Kent were formed into a new earldom for Leofwine. The Godwin family thus held the whole of England, apart from Mercia, under the kingship of Edward the Confessor, who was by now largely content to leave effective rule to his earls. When Tostig assumed his new role, he was likely still in his mid-20s, and the challenges before him were immense. Northumbria was a wild and unsettled land, ravaged by feuds, marked by lawlessness, and far removed from his native Wessex. Its powerful lords may well have resented the appointment of a southern noble to govern them, but Tostig's Danish heritage, with his mother being of Danish descent, may have afforded him some insight into the region's unique culture, where Anglo-Saxon, Danish, and Norse traditions mingled. One of the most pressing threats he faced was the defence of Northumbria against the incursions of Malcolm Canmore, King of the Scots. Malcolm began with a series of violent cross-border raids, but Tostig, favouring diplomacy over conflict, succeeded in negotiating a peace. This culminated in an oath of brotherhood between the two men, symbolising a bond of mutual respect and alliance. Securing this peace, Tostig felt increasingly free to now leave his earldom, at times to attend the royal court, at others to oversee his personal estates. He even joined his brother Harald in a military campaign against Wales, demonstrating both his ambition and growing involvement in the affairs of the wider realm. Llewellyn ap Gruffydd was the only Welsh king to unite all of Wales, ruling from the year 1055 to 1063. He reached an agreement with Edward the Confessor, but the death of his ally Elfgar, the Earl of Mercia, in the year 1062 left him and the Welsh vulnerable. In late 1062, Harold Godwinson led a bold campaign deep into Wales. Llewellyn ap Gruffydd was nearly captured, but was warned in time to escape out onto the sea into his ships, though his other ships were destroyed. In the spring of the year 1063, Harold's brother Tostig led an army into North Wales, while Harold led the fleet first to South Wales and then north to meet his brother's army. The Welsh king was forced to take refuge in Snowdonia, where he met his death, but he was betrayed by his men, and his head was sent to Harold. After his death, Wales was again divided into separate kingdoms, with Tostig being instrumental in the subjugation of Wales. In the year 1061, Tostig participated in the important English embassy to Rome, a delegation sent by King Edward the Confessor to Pope Nicholas II to address various affairs regarding the Church. Accompanying the bishops on this sacred mission, Tostig provided protection with his retinue of housecarls, elite warriors of Danish and Norse descent, who served as his personal guard. These seasoned fighters, known for their discipline and prowess, were considered among the finest soldiers in all of Europe. At Easter, Pope Nicholas II convened a synod in Rome, which both Tostig and Archbishop Ealdred attended. Such was Tostig's stature that he was reportedly granted a seat beside the Pope himself, a rare honour that underscored his standing. The mission concluded successfully, and the delegation returned to England having accomplished nearly all of its goals. During Tostig's frequent absences, Northumbria was ably governed by his deputy Cosby, a respected local magnate. Yet, despite Cosby's capable stewardship, unrest began to simmer among the Northumbrians. A central source of tension was Tostig's imposition of a tribute, widely regarded by the local thanes as both excessive and unjust. This may have been a calculated attempt to raise the region's historically low taxes to levels more consistent with those earldoms in England, or perhaps a means of covering Tostig's own expenses, particularly those incurred during his campaigns in Wales. As was customary, 1/3 of these levies remained in the Earl's coffers, rather than the King's. Tostig's standing suffered further blows. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle accuses him of having robbed God. This is difficult to interpret, especially given his reputation for piety and generosity toward the Church. His administration of justice in this notoriously unruly province also caused friction. Tostig would try to restore order using harsh methods, such as executions, mutilations, and the confiscation of property from robbers. This was viewed by many not as justice, but as cruelty. Some even accused him of profiting from these punishments, suggesting personal gain. In his efforts to curb the deeply entrenched Northumbrian tradition of blood feuds, Tostig may have attempted to impose legal codes from Wessex, but these southern reforms only deepened the alienation of the local nobility. Relations between Tostig and the discontented thanes reached a breaking point in around the year 1063 or 1064, when two nobles, Gamel the son of Orm and Ulf the son of Dulfin, were murdered under his hospitality and protection. A third, Gospatrick son of Uhtred, was likewise slain at Christmas the following year. These assassinations destroyed any remaining hope of reconciliation. Tostig had been entangled in the very blood feuds he sought to end, with many of Northumbria's leading families now openly wishing him dead. The long-brewing resentment broke out on the 3rd of October in the year 1065, while Tostig was hunting in the south with his brother-in-law King Edward the Confessor. A force of 200 men entered York, backed by the city's citizens. They stormed Tostig's residence, killed 2 of his housecarls, and seized control. The next day, around 200 of his supporters were massacred, his treasury still heavy with silver and gold collected by his reeves was looted. All the Thanes of York rose in rebellion. These Thanes, second to ealdormen in rank, now stood united against their Earl. The rebels declared Tostig an outlaw and proclaimed Morcar, the brother of Edwin the Earl of Mercia, as the new Earl of Northumbria. Though native candidates such as Wulftheof, son of the former Earl Siward, were available, the choice of Morcar was strategic. It ensured Mercian support. Should Harold Godwinson, Tostig's powerful brother and the Earl of Wessex, attempt to restore him by force. Morcar and Edwin, young sons of the recently deceased Elfgar of Mercia, had long been rivals to Tostig. Their rise now seemed the culmination of years of political hostility. As the rebellion gathered momentum, the Northumbrians marched south, rallying support from the surrounding shires. Those suspected of loyalty to Tostig were hunted down and slain, whether in York, Lincoln, or the villages, fields and waterways of the countryside. By the time the rebels reached Northampton, they had been joined by Earl Edwin himself, commanding a substantial Mercian force, bolstered by Welsh contingents, no friends to the Godwinsons. Northumbria, parts of Mercia, and allied Welsh forces were now in open rebellion. King Edward the Confessor responded to the revolt by summoning his councillors to Oxford, where he began to make preparations for a march north to confront the rebels. Harald, the Earl of Wessex, who was now the king's most trusted advisor, was dispatched to negotiate with the northerners. The rebels remained defiant, urging Harold to persuade the king to accept their choice of Morcar as the new Earl of Northumbria. While Harold journeyed south to inform the king, the rebels unleashed destruction upon the region surrounding Northampton. Many were slain, others were taken prisoner, and entire settlements were left in ruins, their barns and houses consumed by fire. In an effort to restore peace, the king sent messengers northward, offering to address any legitimate grievances, provided the rebels ceased their devastation, but the Northumbrians refused to yield and offered a stark ultimatum. Tostig must first be deposed and sent into exile. Only then would they lay down their arms. Furious, King Edward summoned the Fjord, his national army. But no army came. Though the unusually harsh winter was cited as the reason for the delay, the truth was plain. Few were willing to plunge the kingdom into civil war. When even his most loyal nobles refused to obey his summons, and when Harold himself urged the king to relinquish his support for Tostig, Edward recognized the bitter truth. He had no choice but to yield. Tostig was summoned before the Witan, the king's council, and was commanded to relinquish his position as the Earl of Northumbria, but he refused. His defiance left the council no alternative. Tostig was declared an outlaw, During the royal council, Tostig openly accused his brother of conspiring with the rebels and betraying him. Whether out of wounded pride, anger, or the bitter sting of abandonment, Tostig believed Harold had turned against him when he needed him most. Although Harold swore an oath that he had not been involved in the rebellion, Tostig remained defiant. Once brothers in arms, who had grown up side by side and fought shoulder to shoulder in the Welsh campaigns, Tostig and Harold were now divided by politics, ambition, and distrust. What had once been a bond of loyalty was now bitter enmity. Such was the sorrow of King Edward at the banishment of his brother-in-law Tostig, and the refusal of his subjects to obey his royal will, that he reportedly fell into deep distress. This anguish, coupled with his advancing age, gave way to a decline in health. With Edward's passing, the throne would go to his chosen successor, Harold Godwinson. Tostig's brother Harold was crowned as the King of England, despite the presence of 3 other rival claimants. The first was Edgar Atheling, the last male heir of the royal line of Alfred the Great. Edgar was only 14 years old, and lacked both military strength and political allies, rendering his claim more symbolic than serious. The second was William, the Duke of Normandy. William asserted that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, and that Harold himself had sworn a solemn oath to support that claim. Further bolstering William's position was his bloodline. His aunt, Emma of Normandy, had once been the Queen of England, mother to both Edward the Confessor and Harthacnut. The third claimant was Harald Hardrada, the formidable King of Norway. He based his claim on an agreement forged years earlier between his predecessor Magnus the Good and Harthacnut, Edward's predecessor on the English throne. The 2 rulers had sworn a mutual oath that whichever of them died first, the other would inherit all of their realms. Upon Harthacnut's death, Magnus indeed claimed Denmark, but Edward had swiftly been crowned in England. Magnus even went so far as to send Edward a letter threatening invasion, an invasion that never materialized. Nevertheless, Hardrada believed that England had been usurped from Magnus, and that with Edward now dead, the English crown was rightfully his. The Witan, England's council of nobles and elders, weighed the competing claims, but in the end, it was Edward's deathbed declaration that swayed them. The dying king had entrusted the kingdom's protection to Harold Godwinson, who stood not only as England's most powerful earl, but also a seasoned military commander, and the man best equipped to defend the realm. And so, with the Witan's vote, Harold was crowned king, setting the stage for one of the most tumultuous years in English history. There can be little doubt that upon hearing of his brother Harold's ascent to the English throne, Tostig's fury deepened. Consumed by anger and resentment, he sought refuge with his brother-in-law Baldwin V, the Count of Flanders. Baldwin welcomed Tostig, his family and household into his court, appointing him as his deputy and granting him both the revenues of the port and the support of Flemish knights. In Flanders, Tostig quickly gathered a sizable force of mercenaries who were drawn by promises of plunder and power. The details of Tostig's movements over the following months remain somewhat obscure, but reports suggest he travelled across the courts of Europe, seeking support for his return to power. He is believed to have visited William, the Duke of Normandy, and Sweyn Estrithson, the King of Denmark, urging them both to join him in launching an invasion of England to reclaim his lost earldom of Northumbria. But for both William and Sweyn, the moment was not yet opportune. Undeterred, Tostig secured a fleet from Baldwin and set sail for England. He landed on the Isle of Wight in May of the year 1066, gathering provisions and levying tribute. His forces raided the southern coast as far as Sandwich, but their advance was halted when King Harold swiftly mobilised both land and naval forces to repel the incursion. Tostig then turned northward. He attempted, without success, to win over his younger brother Gurth to his cause. Thwarted again, he launched fresh raids into Norfolk and Lincolnshire, but this time the resistance was swift and decisive. The northern earls Edwin and Morcar confronted him in battle and dealt him a crushing defeat. As his forces crumbled and his men deserted him, Tostig was forced to flee. Seeking refuge once more, he made his way to the court of King Malcolm III of Scotland. It was there in the Scottish kingdom that Tostig spent the summer of 1066 waiting, watching, and preparing for one final attempt to reclaim what he had lost. Tostig then journeyed to Norway, where he sought an audience with King Harold Hardrada. According to the Norse sagas, Tostig recounted in full all that had transpired since his exile from England, and pleaded for Harold's support in reclaiming his lost earldom. At first, the king was hesitant. "The Norsemen have little appetite for war in England," he said, "nor do they care to be ruled by English lords. Besides, people say the English are not to be trusted." Tostig replied with a pointed question. "Is it true what I've heard in England, that your kinsman King Magnus once sent envoys to King Edward, claiming a right to the English crown as well as to Denmark, through an agreement made with Harthacnut?" "If that were true," Harold answered, "then why did he not claim the English throne?" To that Tostig responded sharply, "Why then do you not hold Denmark, as King Magnus once did?" The king retorted, "The Danes have little to boast over us Norsemen. We've burned many of their towns to ash, including lands belonging to your kin." But Tostig pressed on, "If you won't say it, then I will. Magnus conquered Denmark because its nobles stood with him. You failed to take it because the people stood against you. And Magnus didn't pursue England because the English firmly backed Edward as their king. But now the situation has changed. Will you not seize England? I can pave the way. With my help, many of the great nobles will support you. All that separates me from my standing equal with my brother Harold is a king's name. And all across the north, none deny your greatness in battle. You fought for 15 years to win Denmark, and now you hesitate to take England, which lies open before you." Harold listened carefully to Tostig's words. Much of what he said rang true, and the thought of adding England to his dominions stirred at the king's ambition. The two men spoke often and at length, until at last Harold resolved to act. He would launch an invasion that summer, with Tostig at his side. Harold sent a message across all Norway, summoning half the kingdom's fighting men to arms. As word spread, speculation swirled. Some recalled Harold's legendary conquests and believed he might indeed succeed. Others warned that England was not so easily taken. It was heavily fortified, its population vast. And so the stage was set. The winds of war stirred once more, and England would soon face its gravest threat in many years. Tostig was a valuable ally to King Harold Hardrada, not merely because he was the brother of Harold Godwinson, the man they sought to overthrow, but because he knew the land intimately. His knowledge of the terrain, the roads, and the loyalties of the northern lords made him an indispensable ally. In August of the year 1066, with the wind at their backs, Hardrada and Tostig crossed the broad sea and landed upon the coast of Yorkshire. They reached the mouth of the Humber River on the 18th of September, and wasting no time, led their forces inland towards the city of York. Just 2 days later, on the 20th of September, they were met at Fulford by the armies of Earls Edwin and Morcar. The English struck first, launching a bold offensive before the Norwegian army could properly form its lines. Morcar's troops surged forward, pressing the weaker segment of the Norse line back into the marshes. For a moment, it seemed the Anglo-Saxons might break through, but their early success quickly waned. The Norwegians rallied, bringing their strongest and freshest troops into the fray. Harold himself shifted forces from the right flank to reinforce the centre, while others were dispatched toward the river. Though the invaders were numerically inferior, they fought with brutal determination, pushing back the English line inch by inch. Edwin's men who were defending the riverbank suddenly found themselves isolated, cut off by the marshland from the rest of the army. Realizing they were vulnerable, they withdrew toward York, hoping to regroup for a last stand. But the Norwegians pressed on relentlessly. Meanwhile, fresh Norse reinforcements arrived, maneuvering around the main battle and opening a devastating third front against the Anglo-Saxons. Outnumbered, outflanked, and exhausted, the defenders were crushed. Edwin and Morcar narrowly escaped with their lives, but the power of Mercia and Northumbria had been shattered. At Fulford, the heart of northern England was torn open by the sword of Hardrada. Tostig fought in the battle with a fury, driven by vengeance against the Northumbrians and Mercians who had risen in rebellion and taken his earldom. For him, the battle was not merely political, it was deeply personal. Following the Norwegian victory, the city of York surrendered. The terms were merciful, perhaps at Tostig's urging, as he may not have wished to see his former capital plundered. The citizens opened their gates under the promise that no harm would come to them. Hostages were brought as a guarantee of peace, and with the city subdued, the Norwegian army withdrew to Stamford Bridge, unaware that a far greater storm was already gathering in the south. According to the Norse Kings saga, when Harold Godwinson's army swept northward with relentless speed, a group of 20 horsemen rode ahead to parley with Tostig. One of them stepped forward and called out, "Is Earl Tostig present in this host?" Tostig replied calmly, "It cannot be denied. You will find him here." Then the horseman said, "Your brother King Harold sends his greetings, and with them a message. He offers you the entire earldom of Northumbria once more, and if that alone is not enough to win your loyalty, he is willing to share with you 1/3 of the kingdom, to rule alongside him as his equal." Tostig answered, his voice heavy with bitter reflection, "This is a far cry from the scorn and enmity he showed me last winter. Had this offer been made then, many brave men would still be alive today, and perhaps England would not stand so divided. But tell me, if I accept these generous terms, what does Harold offer King Harold Sigurdsson, who has sailed so far and risked so much?" The horseman replied coldly, "He considered that as well, and promises him 7 feet of English soil or more, as he is taller than other men," implying that both Harold Hardrada and his army would be killed and buried on English soil. At this, Tostig's expression darkened, and he said, "Then ride back and tell King Harold to prepare for battle. Let it never be said that Earl Tostig abandoned Harold Sigurdsson to join his enemies when he crossed the sea to fight at my side. We have made our choice, to win England by the sword, or die with honour upon her soil." The horsemen turned and rode back toward the advancing English army. When Tostig returned to the Norse lines, King Harold Sigurdsson asked, "Who was that man, the one who spoke with such poise and power?" Tostig replied, "That was my brother, King Harold Godwinson himself." King Harold narrowed his eyes. "That was concealed from me far too long. He came so close to our lines that he never should have returned alive." But Tostig replied solemnly, "It may have been unwise, as you say, for two such men to meet in such a way, but he came offering peace and a crown. Had I betrayed him then, I would have been his murderer. I would rather die at his hand than be the one to spill his blood, if one of us must fall." The sudden arrival of the entirety of the English army took the Norwegians by surprise. The Anglo-Saxon advance, however, was briefly hindered by the narrow bottleneck of Stamford Bridge itself. According to both the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Chronicle of Henry of Huntingdon, a lone Norse warrior wielding a great Dane axe stationed himself at the heart of the crossing and held off the entirety of the English army. This brave delay gave the bulk of the Norse army time to assemble in a traditional shield wall formation to meet the oncoming assault. Once Harold Godwinson's forces had poured across the bridge, they quickly formed their own line, locked shields, and charged. The battle soon spilled beyond the bridge and raged across the surrounding fields. Though the fighting lasted for hours, the Norwegians were at a severe disadvantage. Many had left their armour behind, not expecting to face combat so soon after the surrender of York. Under the relentless English assault, the Norse line began to splinter. The once impenetrable shield wall broke apart, and the English forced their way through, cutting down the invaders from within. King Harold Hardrada himself was struck down by an arrow to the throat, and with his death, the tide turned irreversibly. According to the Norse sagas, Tostig took up the king's royal banner and continued the fight, determined to rally what remained of the army. But with their king dead and their lines broken, the spirit of the Norwegians faltered. The fighting had turned into a carnal bloodbath, and the Norwegians began to flee. Tostig, refusing to retreat, fell in the chaos, slain alongside the men he led to war. And so ended the battle at Stamford Bridge, a battle that would mark the end of the great Viking invasions of England. After his death at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Tostig's body was laid to rest in York. His sons, now orphaned and dispossessed, fled across the sea to Norway, seeking refuge in a foreign land. His widow, Judith of Flanders, eventually remarried, joining her fate to Duke Welf of Bavaria. Barely 19 days after his victory over Tostig and Harold Hardrada, King Harold Godwinson was once more called to arms. With his army still weary and bloodied from the northern campaign, he marched south to meet William of Normandy, and there on the fields near Hastings, he met defeat and death. Many historians have called Tostig's bitter feud with his brother the spark that shattered the Anglo-Saxon realm. The exile of Tostig and the loss of Northumbria from the Godwin family's control are seen as pivotal, seriously weakening England's ability to resist invasion. Tostig's wrath not only fractured the unity of Harold's reign, but may have also stirred William of Normandy to press his claim, reminding him of England's vulnerability. By allying himself with Harold Hardrada, Tostig helped unleash the devastating Norse invasion that claimed countless lives at the Battle of Fulford. Though Harold Godwinson's army was victorious at Stamford Bridge, it came at a terrible cost. His army was now depleted after 2 battles against the Norsemen, and he was then forced to march south to face yet another enemy. The final confrontation at Hastings, some argue, might have ended differently had the Godwinsons stood united, if Tostig had never been exiled. In that alternative future, the Norse might have never landed, and William of Normandy may have found himself crushed beneath the full strength of a united English kingdom. Therefore, Tostig's exile can be seen not merely as a personal downfall, but as the catalyst for the twin disasters of 1066, the Norse invasion and the Norman conquest. Yet, Tostig's legacy did not die with him. His bloodline endured. His sons, though banished from their homeland, survived, fleeing to Norway after Stamford Bridge. They found protection at the royal court. One of them, Skuli Tostigson, likely born before Tostig's marriage to Judith of Flanders, rose to prominence in his adopted land. In time, his descendants would shape the future of Norway. Skuli became the great-great-grandfather of King Ingne II of Norway, founding a noble and royal lineage that would carry the legacy of Tostig Godwinson far beyond the shores of England. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Seitz. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.